Hey guys, if we haven't already met, my name is Channing, and I'm going to be starting us off on a new series this week. It's called Like Me. If you guys didn't hear, we're going to be meeting in person for Sunday school at 9:45, but we're also still going to be available on Sundays on Instagram and Facebook. We'll be posting the videos too, so if you want to stick with that, we'll see you here as well, but we'd love to see your face. So to go ahead and just jump right into our lesson, it's called Like Me, and today we're going to be focusing on not comparing our worth to other people's lives and Instagram posts and highlight reels and all of that. So don't you guys kind of hate it when you're sitting there and you kind of just think your life's unfair? Maybe it's in class whenever someone who didn't study at all just kind of rolls in the day of the test and somehow makes a perfect grade and you were up all night studying. Or maybe it's your sibling and you're the one that always does the chores and you're the one that follows the rules, but yet they still somehow get what they want and you guys get the same treatment, and that's unfair. I could keep going on examples of how things are unfair, but I'm sure you guys can think of some in your own lives. But something that I kind of also think about when I think about my life is unfair is when I'm scrolling through Instagram. And I could count the number of times that I've been scrolling and I've been happy with my life, content with things like the way things are going, minding my own business. And then you kind of start to see people's pictures at your favorite vacation spot. And that's so unfair. They were just there, and why aren't you there? Or maybe you see someone at this concert that you wanted to go to and you liked them better and those were your favorite band, but they're there. Or maybe it's that friend or that other person where it seems that everything that they wear, they look good in. And we're over here worried about how to get our skin under control or how to find those clothes that make us look good. And you know what I mean. We have all seen it. We've all been there where we're just stuck in this rut of her life. His life is so much better because she has that or she has this, and you guys know. So I can go from feeling great about my life to feeling like it's nothing in about 10 seconds. And all of a sudden I'm just disappointed, I'm mad, and I'm just thinking that life's unfair. So let's dive a little bit deeper into this feeling of unfairness. But really, this feeling of unfairness kind of comes from a comparison. So we kind of, when we start to feel like life is unfair, we kind of are assuming, and we start to assume that other people have this perfect life. And so we look at what they put online, and then we match up to what we know about our own current realities. And when we do that, we kind of tell ourselves that their life looks better and that they look better, and therefore we convince ourselves that therefore their life must be better than my life. So we feel less than, and it's typically when we feel less than that we respond in maybe one of the following ways. We could maybe respond by we overachieve and we compensate and we see everyone else's perfect life, so we go too far and too much trying to overcompensate. Or we do nothing in the complete opposite sense and we kind of see how everyone else's lives are perfect, so what's even the point in trying? Or maybe we just play it over and over in our minds, whether that's anxiety, sadness, jealousy, or motivation to go out there and make your post look better, just as good as theirs. You can maybe find yourself not able to think about anything else than this idea that I need to be just as perfect. So no matter how we're responding, the result is always the same, and the result is that it feels bad. So that's what comparison does to us. And the tricky thing about comparing our life to someone else's is we know our own personal lives too well. We know and we live the good, the bad, the happy, and the sad. And so we know that places like social media are designed to display the highlights of life, just the good stuff. So we're not seeing other people's unhappy days and bad days. And that's why we will do everything we can to make sure that others only see the highlight reel of our lives. So we're not going to post about the fight we just had with our best friend on Instagram at least, but we will post a picture of us that took us 30 tries to take, and we fixed the lighting, we fixed the filter, we fixed our outfits, and we sent the caption to our friends and made sure that it was Instagram worthy. And I know you guys all know what I'm talking about. We have all done it. We've all perfected this art of projecting the life that we want others to think that we have. And even if it doesn't match the life we actually have, we're still going to try to project that. So here's what is crazy is that we forget that everyone else is doing the exact same thing that we're doing. So they're posting their best lives and not their real life. But somehow our brains trick us into believing that their highlights are their real life and that their lives are perfect. So let me say it another way. When we compare ourselves to others, especially on social media, we believe things about ourselves based on someone else's half-true and maybe even fully fake display of life. So comparison has just become such a norm in our culture, and most of us don't even realize that we're doing it. As soon as we start scrolling on Instagram, we start comparing ourselves, but we don't always catch that. So the good news is that we're going to talk a little bit more today in the next few minutes about ways that will not only help us recognize when we're doing it, but it'll also kind of help us understand what to do about it. So in a world full of social media, it may seem impossible and a little bit unrealistic, but if you just hang with me, I think you might be surprised at what we can see is actually possible. So let's dive into the Bible. We're going to be talking about a guy named Paul. You guys may have heard of him. If you haven't, he was one of the greatest teachers and followers of Jesus that ever lived. And he made it his mission to make sure that everyone he met knew how their lives could benefit from following Jesus. And he traveled all over the known world, establishing relationships with many different groups of people in different regions who viewed him as an authority figure when it came to how to live a better life thanks to Jesus. So Paul traveled around town to town, and he maintained these relationships with people and offered them the life-changing news of who Jesus was and what he offered. But Paul wasn't always present in these different churches that he planted, so he made a point to write letters to stay connected, which you could kind of say is like our modern day Instagram and Snapchat way of staying connected. So these letters that Paul was sending, though, were pretty direct, and he was passionate about following Jesus and leading others to do the same. So everything that Paul was doing was out of love, but it's very likely that sometimes people felt like they were being called out in areas where they were messing up, and they weren't quite measuring up to what Paul was saying we were called to do. And so in response, they did exactly what I'm sure a lot of us have done, and they lashed out. So they began to tear Paul down, and their strategy to feel better about themselves was to make him look worse. So they were petty. And this is how Paul responds to these criticisms. He says, "Oh, don't worry. We wouldn't dare say that we are as wonderful as these other men who tell you how important they are, but they are only comparing themselves with each other, using themselves as the standard of measurement. How ignorant." That's 2 Corinthians 10:12. And I'm not sure, but that kind of seems like a little bit of an ancient tool of sarcasm. Paul clapped back at his critics, and he was not messing around. And in this passage, he's addressing the comparing that is going on among the people and the struggle that is created from that comparison. So Paul's saying in no uncertain terms that it's absolutely ridiculous to let your behavior and your life be based on a comparison to someone else's behavior or life. And it's even more ridiculous to spend time figuring out how you measure up to people just like you in order to make yourself look better. And just kind of sum it up, Paul's saying, hey, look, comparison to any human to another human is an ignorant idea, and you kind of look silly doing it because it's never going to add up. But there's kind of, to take it back to the Old Testament, there's another principle that we can find in the book of Proverbs. And Proverbs tells us, above all else, guard your heart, for everything you do flows from it. And that can be found in Proverbs 4:23. So Solomon was the man who wrote this principle, and he was passionate about how important it is to guard our hearts. And why is he giving us this principle of guarding our hearts? It's because what we do almost always comes from what we believe in our hearts. And our hearts matter because they control everything else. So we should definitely guard our hearts. So the opposite, one of the quickest ways to destroy our hearts is comparison. So when we see a post about how great someone else's life is and we allow it to get to our hearts, to mess with what we believe about ourselves, that's when we're in danger. And if it makes us feel less than or worthless, it's like an attack on the heart that can ultimately mess with our whole lives. So that's why we have to get it right, that we can't compare ourselves with other people's posts. So don't look at someone else and assume that their life is perfect or conclude that your life isn't perfect just because it looks like theirs is. So, I mean, all of that sounds great, but how do we guard our hearts? How does that look like in everyday life? So I think it kind of starts off when you find yourself in a situation when you can tell that you don't feel great and you can feel yourself comparing, whether it's on social media or real life. Be on guard and pay attention, and that's kind of a sign that something is trying to get to your heart and you need to set a boundary there. So it's kind of hard it's hard to notice those moments sometimes, but that's why being on guard can be helpful. So pay attention to what you do when you feel yourself spiraling into this comparison game, and maybe you find yourself overachieving and striving, or maybe you find yourself doing nothing, or maybe you find yourself playing those images over and over in your head. But regardless of what it is, be on guard, and you can kind of be on guard by asking yourself, what things are fueling how I feel? What are some things I want to do because of how I feel? And what or who am I comparing myself to that's bringing up these feelings? So we guard our hearts by paying attention to what we feel when we're tempted to play this game of comparison. And it may seem like a really big task, but I promise you're not the only one who struggles to compare your life with someone else's. But living a life where you feel less than doesn't have to define how you feel, and it certainly doesn't need to define your worth. So remember, don't compare your worth to other people's posts. So what would it look like if you began to guard your heart when it comes to comparing your life to others? Imagine being able to walk in confident about who you are and not worried about what other people are doing, what they're wearing, what their pictures look like. Imagine how different your day could be without this comparison. I hope you guys have a great and blessed day, and I can't wait to see you guys soon. Thanks for listening.